Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this public hearing. Today's public hearing is convened under the provisions of the Local Government Act of British Columbia to hear submissions relative to the proposed bylaws. All persons who believe that their interest in property is affected by the proposed bylaw shall be given a reasonable opportunity to be heard respecting matters in the proposed bylaw. I would ask those members of the public who wish to speak to commence your address to this board by clearly stating your name. The board will not debate the matters of a proposed bylaw with individual citizens, but members may ask questions of you following your presentation. The primary function of this public hearing is to listen to your views. No one will be or should feel discouraged or prevented from making their opinions heard. So first hearing, bylaw 2821 would rezone 5914 Angus Horn Street and 857 Spruce Street in Blue River to R1 residential and add a site-specific amendment to allow horticulture use at 857 Spruce Street. Madam Corporate Officer, are there any written submissions?
There are no written submissions. However, Mr. Wolf is on Zoom, should the board have any questions.
Thank you. Are there any in-person submissions?
No, there are no in-person submissions.
All right, I'll call a second time for further representation. Calling a third time for further representation. There being no further speakers, I declare this public hearing closed. All right. Call to order this meeting of the Thompson-Nicola Regional District for Thursday, September the 7th, 2023. The TNRD acknowledges that we connect with many First Nations communities across our vast regional district, and today we are located in the Tecumseh territory, situated within the unceded ancestral lands of the Secwepemc Nation. The TNRD appreciates the partnership that we have with Tecumseh and respect the territory and land on which we gather today. Chair's announcements. We have an HR emergency safety update. Just a friendly reminder to everyone that in the case of an emergency, the meeting will be temporarily adjourned. We shall exit through the double doors to my left, my best flight attendant impersonation here, the double doors to my left, or the doors at the back leading to the back stairwell. The muster point is the parking lot at the northeast corner of 5th Avenue and Seymour Street. We have a Fire Smart update. The TNRD would like to congratulate our Fire Smart coordinator, Dan Funk, whom Fire Smart BC has recognized as the local Fire Smart representative for September. Each month's Fire Smart BC highlights a local Fire Smart representative in BC who is making a significant impact in their local community or area. And this month they chose Dan Funk. Dan has been the TNRD's Fire Smart coordinator for 6 months. Since then, he has spent much time on the road working with private landowners, attending community events, and setting up a Fire Smart display booth in public places of the TNRD. All of this is done to help landowners understand how to reduce the risk of their property being affected by a wildfire. Dan is a carpenter by trade and came to the TNRD after a career with Kamloops Fire Rescue as a firefighter and fire investigator. His knowledge and expertise have been extremely valuable in supporting our residents. Once again, we applaud Dan for this recognition as the Fire Smart BC Local Fire Smart Representative of the Month. We have an update from the Thompson-Nicola Regional Library. The TNRL welcomes Jennifer Krumka to the TNRL this fall as our second writer in residence. A graduate of UBC's Master of Journalism program, Jennifer Krumka is an award-winning local journalist and storyteller with CBC Radio. Her term will run from September to December. She will spend half her time hosting one-on-one consultations and public writing workshops throughout the TNRD and half her time on her writing projects. Further information can be found in your blue folders. External Relations and Advocacy Advisor Update, National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. On behalf of the TNRD Board of Directors, I want to remind everyone that September 30th is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. This day is to recognize and commemorate the legacy of residential schools and take the time to consider what each of us can do as individuals and as a board to advance reconciliation with Indigenous peoples and learn more about our shared history. The Thompson-Nicola Regional District knows that the road to reconciliation is long, but let us take this day to reflect upon the work we can do as a regional district to help in reconciliation efforts. The TNRD wishes to honor the residential school survivors and the families and communities whose children did not come home. Insert Chair Roden's update, it says here. And I would like to say that the Kamloops Chamber of Commerce held a social last night at the Paramount Theatre across the street. And it was to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Kamloops Film Society, which began life 50 years ago as the Caribou College Film Society. They've had a variety of homes before arriving at the Paramount Theatre, which through the generous support of the Kelson Group is now their permanent home, which they are able to lease for a nominal fee each year. It is a 58-year-old building. The seats are not perhaps the most comfortable cinema seats in the world. And so we found out last night, Film Commissioner Hadwin and I, who attended, along with about 150 other people, there was an actual red carpet. They are now starting a fundraising event, which will run through to spring of next year to raise funds to replace the seats in the Paramount Theatre. So full details will be coming out. It's the first fundraiser they've run, and they are anticipating that many patrons over the years who've experienced the current seats will be happy to help them purchase new ones. So absent from today's meeting, Director Kelly Hall is unable to be here, so we welcome alternate director Nancy Beppel. The flight attendant, alternate director Nancy Beppel to my right. Upcoming meetings and events. Big breath here. Monday, September 11th, we have a 70-mile community meeting. September 18th to 22nd, UBCM 2023 is in Vancouver this year with the convention theme of Balancing Act. Monday, September 25th, there is a delegated public hearing at the Westwold Community Hall. Saturday, September 30th is the National Truth and Reconciliation Days. The TNRD offices will be closed on the following Monday, which is October 2nd. Monday, October 9th is Thanksgiving Day. The TNRD offices will again be closed. Thursday, October 12th at 10 a.m. Utility Committee meeting. Thursday, October 12th at 1:30 regular board meeting. Friday, October the 13th, not at all inauspicious, we have a committee of the whole meeting starting at 9. Today in your blue folders, you will find code of conduct forms for those who missed the Blue River regular board meeting. TNRD building permit activity highlights for August, which also has a comparison of 2023 versus 2022. The fall 2023 mobile library schedule. TNRL information regarding our writer in residence, Jennifer Krumka, and any regular mail. So that should be about 4 o'clock. So it's time for the hospital. No, it's not 4 o'clock yet. All right. So we move on to additions to or deletions from the agenda. We do have one deletion, which is that the scheduled delegation is unable to appear. So could I please have a motion to adopt the agenda as amended?
So moved.
Director Stamer, Vice Chair Smith, thank you. Any further additions to or deletions from the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor, opposed if any, carried. We have bylaws from public hearing. Oh, we have the minutes of the previous meeting. We should have.
The minutes will be on the next agenda for the next regular meeting.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, bylaws from public hearing. 6.1, we have zoning amendment bylaw 2821 for Blue River. We do have a recommendation.
Second.
Director Onslow and Director Blackwell seconds. Thank you. Any discussion? No discussion? Oh, Director Middleton?
I just noticed in the report that they have applied to or are working with the Blue River Water System or TNRD Water System, whichever, about signing up for, I believe it would be the Spruce Street, where they want to have the horticultural enterprise there. Is there confirmation that there is actually enough water, or that the utility can supply them with water for that, or does that really matter right now?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair. So there should be capacity. That's not the issue. They're just doing the paperwork in terms of getting a connection for horticulture, which is a bit unique. Our bylaws weren't written for that. They were written for dwelling connections. So the owner is working with our utilities manager as we speak. If board gives third reading today, the bylaw would go to the Ministry of Transportation. That'll give time for the owner to work through this with our utilities department, and then the bylaw would come back for final adoption at that time.
Thank you. Are there any further comments or questions? On the motion then, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? Thank you. That is carried. We skip over 7.1. We move on to 8.1 bylaws, zoning amendment bylaw number 2817 Birch Island in Area A. And I just want to say here, I can now picture these areas. So that was one wonderful offshoot of our meeting 3 weeks ago, is that I can now picture in my head where this is taking place. It's not just a dot on a map. We do have a recommendation. Director Blackwell, Director Sal, second. Thank you very much. Discussion. Any discussion on this item? Questions, comments? On the question, then all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. 8.2 zoning amendment bylaw 2823 east of Logan Lake.
Move the recommendation.
Vice Chair Smith, thank you. Director Ranta seconds. Discussion. Questions or comments? Seeing none on the question, then all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. We move on to 9.1.1. We have CAO Hildebrandt's verbal report.
Thank you, Chair Roden, and good afternoon, Board of Directors. I typically only do a CAO report once a month, and it's usually the second meeting, but we're going to all be at UBCM for that one. But I did have one important update I wanted to provide, as well as I would like to have Mr. Kelly do a quick update from the External Relations and Advocacy role. So as of today, the Emergency Operations Center will have been activated for more than 49 consecutive days for the summer wildfire season. The EOC was also previously active this April and May for both wildfire and flood response. As a total, our staff have been working in our EOC for over 3 months straight now, which is a massive challenge to our day-to-day operations. We talked a bit about this yesterday in a few of the committee meetings. It's the same staff that are preparing meeting agendas, capital planning, operational projects, and communications that are the same people that we're relying on to send out evacuation alerts, evacuation orders, and public meetings, and taking calls from our residents. But it's no surprise, emergency operations has to be the priority. I'm extremely happy to report that as of 7 p.m. last night, our evacuation orders in the TNRD, the last of the remaining evacuation orders in the TNRD were rescinded, which is amazing news. These were for approximately 75 property owners on Lower Adams Lake. After such a busy summer, it's a good day for our Emergency Operations Center and all of our partners and agencies. Unfortunately, comes with some bad news. We actually had 11 properties that were impacted in the Adams Lake area with structures, total loss of structures of 9 of those 11. We've already engaged our recovery manager, and they've already been in contact with all 11 impacted community or impacted residents, and we'll be moving through that process from a recovery standpoint. Our EOC will remain active into the next week, managing ongoing evacuation alerts, providing support for our impacted residents to the region, but at a much lower level of activity, hours of operations, and staffing. Over 500 civic addresses through the TNRD still remain on an evacuation alert. While the weather has certainly shifted to more seasonal conditions, the current forecast is to continue to be warm and dry, and at least for the next week or so. So fire activity is still very possible and continues. I think I can safely say from the board and from all of our leadership team that we're very grateful for our EOC team and our Kamloops Emergency Support Service partner on the amazing work that's been accomplished this season over the last 3 months. The leadership, experience, dedication, and communication was absolutely amazing. I wanted to formally and publicly thank the entire team for their time and effort throughout 2023. I also want to thank many of our board directors for their input and leadership during another challenging time during the wildfire season. I know many of the staff that are going to take some time off and plans for well-deserved vacations. So thank you to everyone involved. That's all I had from an EOC update. And if I may, through you, Chair Roden, is to pass it over to Corbin for an update from his position.
Thank you, CEO Hildebrand, and good afternoon, Madam Chair and Board of Directors. Since my last update provided to the board in Blue River in August, we have continued to accomplish a number of initiatives, especially prior to UBCM. Starting off the list, both CAO Hildebrand and myself met with Chief and Council of Kamloops. It was a very productive meeting where we discussed a number of ongoing initiatives that we would like to see done here at the regional district to work towards a better and lasting partnership with Kamloops Taysquatmik. Similarly, we also met with senior staff from CIMC in the North Thompson. That was another very well received meeting. We are establishing a working group with CIMC that we are hoping to have regular meetings with to be able to bring forward a number of ongoing projects that we have within their territory. To date, both CAO Hildebrand and myself, as well as some other staff, as necessary, have met with the Ministry for Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, Agriculture and Food, the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, the Ministry of Forests, and the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, with a meeting planned for the Ministry of Finance next week. Overall, all meetings have gone very well with senior staff from all of those ministries, and has allowed us to provide very specific examples and background to the requests that have been made to their ministries from you as the board. Coming mid-October, I will be sitting down with superintendents from School District 73 and School District 74 to begin plans for a youth advisory council to be part of this organization. We have begun to update wording on our website to better reflect moving forward in a good way with First Nations partners that we have. This includes just changing simple things like there are 25 First Nations within the Thompson-Nicola Regional District to something to say that the TNRD resides upon the territories of 25 First Nations. So it's the small steps that we're taking to advance reconciliation as an organization. I do have one request through my verbal report. As Chair Roden mentioned, September 30th is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. It's therefore requested that the board approve the half-masting of flags from sunrise to sunset on September 30th in recognition of this national holiday.
Moved by Director Bass, seconded by Director Sarai. Thank you. Any comments on the recommendation? No? Seeing none on the question, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Thank you, Mr. Kelly. We move on to CEO Hildebrand.
Sorry, Chair Roden, thank you. I just wanted to know if there was any questions from my EOC report or if there's anything, any questions for Corbin, since it was kind of all part of my CEO update.
Alternate Director Beppel.
Thank you. Through to CAO Hildebrand. As we go from having a fire season to just having fire all the time, is there a need for the TNRD to have more facilities to house the people that are working on the EOC?
Thank you, Director Beppel, through the chair. I appreciate the comment and the question. We are in good shape right now. Our new EOC that you may not be completely up to date with was just opened here a few months ago in time for this season. It's been proven to be a very great space. We're still upgrading it with some technology and new things that'll help us be even better than we have been, but we are very comfortable with our space. We have the technology, we have the staffing, and I feel like we're in good shape going forward. But thank you for that.
Director Blackwell?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, through you to Chair Hildebrand. Thank you both for both those reports and the key points in them. I think both are important topics, especially the wildfire and the EOC. I know that there's changes to emergency management legislation coming down. Are we anticipating expansion or increase in staffing for our EOCs moving forward and to deal with the changes in that legislation, or do we know enough yet?
Thank you, Director Blackwell, and through Chair Roden. We don't have enough information. I'll maybe defer to Jamie if he thinks differently, but I don't believe we have enough information yet. I know Mr. Skrapnek is certainly well informed and has been kind of connected with that ministry because there is supposed to be significant change coming. We don't know what that looks like yet, so we haven't had the chance to strategize or even plan for that yet, but it's certainly top of list for us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for CEO Hildebrand or Mr. Kelly? No? All right, thank you. We move on to 9.1.2, training for Board of Directors through the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund. We do have a recommendation, but two recommendations before we get to them. External Relations Manager Kelly, is there anything you wanted to add to your report?
Thank you, Chair Roden. Not anything extensive, other than to just provide a bit of an overview as to what this training will look like. Attached is a quote from Sanyas Cultural and Humility Training, who provides the cultural awareness training for a number of health authorities within this province. It is $300 per person, or a total of $9,300, which will be either covered through the grant that we are also requesting approval to submit, or there is additional funding available within the board's budget should we not be successful in that grant application. The purpose of this is to bring the board more closely in line with the 2023-2026 strategic plan and ensure that there is consistency across the board, of course, recognizing that some directors may have already had training upon assuming office last year, but this is something that is more in-depth than perhaps what that training may have been, and again, provides that consistency for us here in this organization. So thank you.
Director Bass, seconded by Director Ranta. Is there any discussion on recommendation 1? All right, we have Director Getz. Did I see another hand to my left? No, Director Getz.
Yeah, I'll have my name removed from this because I'm in the middle of doing the exact same course through the city at this point in time and saying yes. So I can have my name removed from that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you talked to Mr. Kelly about that and just make, if anyone is undergoing the exact same training elsewhere, then it would seem belt and braces to have them do it through the TNRD as well. Director Middleton.
Thank you. Indicates that this is online and self-led, that it is 8 one-hour sessions. Can those be completed? Are they put out one section at a time? If you chose, you could, I'm going to say, just blitz and do it in one session for yourself, if that's what you chose.
Mr. Kelly, or?
Oh, I'm sorry. I would suggest that you do one at a time. If you blitz through, then you kind of miss the whole purpose of the whole thing. It's not overly wordy, but you do need to focus on part of the program. So I would say take your time to do it, because there's a quiz at the end, sort of thing. So.
Right.
Supplementary that, yeah, I do realize that, and I agree on that. I just want to make sure it wasn't something where modules were put out at a time phrase and you would sort of say, now I need to be available for 8 weeks. to do this. This can be done on your own time frame in that sense.
Thank you, CAO Hildebrand.
Thank you, Chair Roden. I believe there is some flexibility built around it, and we can certainly dig into it a little bit more. And if I would also just provide some other information that the management team in the last 6 months has also gone through something very similar in training, and it was very well received, and I think people really enjoyed the training.
So although it says one hour a week, I think Director Middleton, you could do it more quickly than 1 hour a week, say 1 hour a day, every day for 8 days, possibly, rather than having to do it over 2 months. Are there any other questions or comments? So on recommendation 1, on the question, all those in favor, opposed, if any, carried, and we do have recommendation 2. Director Bass, seconded by Director Newstater. Questions or comments? Seeing none on the question, then all those in favor, opposed, if any, that is carried. 9.1.3 Canada Community Benefits Fund and reallocation of electoral area B Community Parks budget. We do have 2 recommendations. Director Onslow, thank you. Second by
Second.
Vice Chair Smith, thank you. Discussion. Director Blackwell.
I need an explanation of the luge hill. I've seen the park and I absolutely love the community park, but can you explain to me how is this an Olympic luge hill? Is this a kid's luge hill? What's going on with the luge hill?
So from my understanding, in the 70s, it was actually a functioning luge hill. And the people of Blue River, it was built through grant funding, and students in Blue River in the 80s were actually going overseas to compete in downhill luging. Since then, it's no longer a functioning luge hill, but it is a very stellar toboggan hill, which you need a helmet, goggles, and full armor practically to do. But it's become very, very overgrown. And so when I first moved to Blue River, which was 7 years ago, it had just been brushed and only a small portion of it. So this will allow the funding to be put to brushing the luge hill. And it's such a popular area for people and their families and the staff that come from Wiggly's. They go up and ski it, and it is a great hill, but it is no longer a luge hill.
Thank you for the historic context.
Any other comments or questions on recommendation 1? Seeing none on the question, all those in favor, opposed, if any, that's carried. Recommendation 2. Director Sarai, seconded by Director Onslow. Thank you. Discussion on this. Questions, comments? Anyone want to know the maximum speed of the luges on the hill? The sky's the limit. All right, on the question then, all those in favor, opposed, if any? How could anyone vote against a luge hill? 9.1.4 Crown Land Referrals, Solar Investigative Licenses. It's near 70 Mile House and Chasm in Electoral Area E. This is for information only. Mr. Kraus is here. If anyone has any questions regarding this, which is, I gather, in a very preliminary stage at this moment. Yes. Any questions regarding this? Director Grenier.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Kraus, just wondering, this is sorry. Just wondering, this is a very large potential use of 5,000 hectares, I guess, is the Crown land. And I'm wondering, is there alternative interests? Because this is a fairly extensive area. And I'm just wondering what the process is. I'm sure Front Counter has a process. I'm just wondering if I could be enlightened on, first dibs on 5,000 acres or hectares, sorry.
Yes, so through the chair. So Front Counter does look at multiple users of that Crown land. In this case, they're looking at 5,000 hectares of area where they could put up these kind of tripod testing devices. So it's not necessarily that they're going to use all 5,000 hectares. So I'm quite certain that the province would ensure that there's no overlap of competing Crown interests. And as part of the process, we're one of the referral agencies, and then there's multiple referral agencies as part of the process.
Any other questions or comments regarding this? No? Seeing none, then we move on to 9.1.5, another information item regarding Marnie's Bay Resort Development Update. Director Stamer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To staff, thank you very much for putting this report together. I do have a couple of questions. First of all, I noticed that under our C4 zoning, it does not restrict the rentable use gross floor area. And I also read here again that the applicant is basically planning some possible 2 and 3 bedroom cabins with mostly just cabin size. So my question is, can you remind us why there is a need for a strata lot development permit? And secondly, why don't we have size limitations in that C4 so that if a developer decides to change his mind, there's nothing we can do about it?
Through the chair, so maybe I'll answer the second question first. Historically, there's been no maximum size in the C4 zone since the introduction of zoning in the regional district. So that's certainly something that the board can look at and direct staff to make those changes. It wouldn't just affect this property, it would affect multiple resort properties. I'm thinking East Barrier Lake, Glimpse Lake, several others. And there has been a blur over the years where it starts as a resort, then it gets strata titled. Then there might even be a question of whether those, in some cases, are still being used as a resort and rentable units. But then it comes down to the use under zoning. So if we ever had a complaint and there were residential, it was used for residential purposes, then there could be bylaw enforcement at that time. So historically is the reason, and we just haven't introduced it since, but we can certainly look at that if directed. And as to the first question, the strata titling, that you asked about a strata permit, there's no strata permit. So the owner can either have one large property, or in this case 2, and operate the resort across that land, or they can apply, in which they've done, to the Ministry of Transportation requesting individual strata lots. From a zoning perspective, as long as it's still operated as a resort, we do have multiple strata resorts in the region where the resort corporate or the strata corporation runs the resort, and then you have multiple different owners of the rentable units. So it's really up to the owner, and this owner has applied to the Ministry of Transportation for strata subdivision, but that's not to say that they'll get the approval or that they'll even follow through on it.
If I may, thanks very much for that explanation. I personally would like to see if staff would look into the possibility of updating our C4 bylaw and the sizes and see if the rest of the board is supportive of that. Again, I mean, we're basically acting on faith here, and things could change, and all of a sudden the purpose of this property was for rental units to access more, have people's the ability to access the lake. And having been it may, that could change. So I'm just wondering if the rest of the board would entertain having staff look into the opportunity of possibly limiting the size of those rental units so that they can't be converted from a rental unit to basically a 4,000 square foot home that is being Airbnb'd, but really that wasn't the purpose in the first place on the property.
All right, acting corporate officer or deputy corporate officer Jeremiah, can we make that motion now, or should this be more properly be brought forward as a notice of motion?
I would say, just let me think about that for a second. Good question, though. If we could have it come forward as a notice of motion, and we can assist with, the verbiage on that, just because the amount of time that it would take for staff to prepare a report and do the research behind it, I think it would be necessary to do it that way.
So a notice of motion, which would come forward at the next meeting, someone would be able to help Director Stamer craft that, and okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alternate Director Bethel.
Thank you. Through to Mr. Kraus, or other staff. The map that was provided is very high level. There was no plan of current or future proposed buildings, and there were no photographs of the site. Was that because we should be able to make the decision based solely on the boundaries of the lots?
Through the chair, no, the reason it wasn't included is that this property and this rezoning has come to the board twice, once in 2021 and once again last year. So I think the request from Director Stamer at the last meeting was to try to get an update report. So that's why we wanted to just focus kind of high level what was happening on the property rather than rehashing or going back into the whole rezoning process. And typically requests like that, we try to keep high level because things like building permit drawings aren't normally part of a board meeting. So we didn't get into specific drawings and just try to keep it high level here as a follow-up.
Thank you. Director Stamer.
Yeah, thanks very much. And for context, again, Director Beppel, we were pretty much assured that it was going to be mostly cabins. And when I started seeing the size of the structures that were being built, I figured the only way for us to be able to get information on that is to get staff to let us know what was actually pulled as a building permit. And again, as you can see, there was one that was 1152 and then the next two are 2000. Those are fairly substantial cabins. So I would rather be proactive than reactive and all of a sudden find there's 15 of them up there that are 4,000 sizes in square feet and go, oh, well, we're allowed to do that because under the zoning, we can. Well, that is not what was proposed. That was not what was really talked about.
Thank you. Any further questions, comments? No, we move on to item 9.2.1, closed meeting matters brought forward to open. And we have a verbal report from the General Manager of People and Engagement, Ms. Allison.
Thank you through the board chair. This is just an update on the closed meeting from our August meeting for the approval of an IT security analyst position. It's a permanent full-time role that the TNRD wishes to fill to maintain and ensure our systems are secure and safe on an ongoing basis. It's a matter brought forward.
Thank you. And this is for information. There's no motion or vote necessary on this, but does anyone have any questions? Follow up to what we heard at Blue River? No? All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Ellison. We have some committee reports. Well, we have one committee report, Wellsgate Gray Country Services Committee. Does anyone have any questions regarding the draft minutes of that committee meeting? No. We also had a Finance and Policy and EA Directors Committee meetings, and we shall be hearing more about those in the fullness of time. Correspondence action requested Siska Indian Band. We have a request for a letter of support from the Siska Indian Band. Alternate Director Beppel, seconded by Director Thorpe. Discussion. Questions or comments? Director Grenier?
Thank you, Chair. I was wondering if there were any transportation corridors or non-Siska interests that would be affected by the proposed course of action.
CEO Hildebrand.
Thank you, Chair Road. Not that I'm aware of, unless anybody else has any. Jamie, if you have any thoughts. Not that we're aware of.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? All right, so on the motion to provide a letter of support for the Siska Band's request, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. 11.1.2, we have a letter from the District of Barrier requesting TNRD support to request a third-party review of the 2023 wildfire response. From what I understand from the news, the province is already saying that they will be doing such a thing, but we do have, I suspect Director Stamer would like to speak to this before we actually make a recommendation.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And from what we understand today, they're talking about a review. They're not talking about a third party review. So I just want to, if I may, for a couple of minutes, I want to thank all the firefighters who've worked so tirelessly in trying situations all summer. I know how difficult it's been for you and your families. I know because I've done it. The letter is fairly specific. It has 3 main points to it. It reminds me of October the 8th, 2021, when I sat in the same room after the 2021 fire season. We all agreed that we should have a tactical review of the BC Wildfire Service in the wildfire season, and that fell on deaf ears. Fortunately enough, past Chair Gillis and myself were able to have conversations with high officials, and that was going along very constructively. And as soon as they announced they were going to have year-round firefighting and the province gave the BC Wildfire Service a whole bunch of money, those contacts and communications stopped. So here's the 3 talking points on the letter. Of course, it goes without saying that this has been BC's worst fire season. More homes, more businesses, more forest area than ever before. Unfortunately, there was 2 fatalities in our wildfire season, and amazingly, no public deaths, especially when stories of people literally running into the lake and lakes to escape the flames. Countless lives are forever altered, possibly ruined, and quite frankly, we need to get to the bottom of what happened. After 2021 fire season, we asked for the support of the tactical review, and again, it fell on deaf ears. So of the 3 points, remind the BC government of their responsibility to protect all information and documentation and emails, etc., relating to the 2023 wildfire season. For reference, an FOI request was accepted for incident command logs on the Monty Lake fire, and those logs mysteriously were lost and pertinent information could not be found. There was no follow-up, there was no investigation, there was nothing from the government on that. We need information from this fire season to be protected and available for a third-party review. That leads me to point 2, a third-party review. The letter explains explicitly what we're requesting. We're requesting a committee of local elected officials and First Nations from affected areas, wildfire experts from other jurisdictions, BC Wildfire Service representatives, as well as a nonpartisan representation from the BC legislature. And that leads me to the 3rd point. This needs to be done immediately. We realize there are many fires still out of control throughout the province, but time is of the essence, and we really have to get to the bottom of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Stamer. So the recommendation is, I've written down, move that the TNRD writes to the province to request a third-party review of the 2023 fire season. Is that acceptable wording for a recommendation? Right. Ms. Jeremiah, did you get that?
Yes, I've got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Sarai?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just curious, third-party review, that can still be BC Wildfire doing a review themselves. Could it be include the word independent third-party review, if that's okay with Mayor?
Yeah, thanks very much, Director Sarai. Yes, that's why we put in there wildfire experts from other jurisdictions, because we don't want an internal review. And I don't believe anybody out there wants an internal review again. And even if we look back, the question was asked, well, there's been other reviews in the past. What is this review going to accomplish? Well, first of all, maybe we'll find out why some of those recommendations that were in those reviews haven't been followed. Why is that? You know, one of the main points of the 2003 Filmon report, which is near and dear to my heart because of the fires in 2003 in Barrier, was at the top of the list was the ability to attack a fire as quickly as you possibly can, initial attack. And if you all remember in 2021, 2022, we seriously pushed for increased services, not only within our TNRD, but in other regional districts to have more local capacity with rapid attack trucks, We all went on the tour, most of us on the tour from McClure all the way to Blue River. I think we were pretty satisfied in what we've been able to accomplish over the years in local response. We know that of all the fires that we've had in the North Thompson Valley, every single one except for one has been attacked and put out within 24 hours with and without the services of the BC Wildfire Service. The only one that wasn't was the one in Oliver Creek, just south of Barrier, approximately 3 weeks ago. And that was in the old burn, low fuel, hard to get at. It was still causing problems because it was rolling debris down onto the only provincial highway we had left open through here because Highway 1 was closed. But that was attacked with locals and the BC Wildfire Service and one helicopter luckily, and that was maintained. Other than that, every other fire was put out within 24 hours. That was a recommendation in the Philman report 20 years ago. And there's other cases of existing fires that are still burning that there was adequate time to be able to attack them at the beginning. And for whatever reason, they weren't. That's what this review will try to find out was what exactly happened. Why weren't those fires attacked when they could have been attacked when they were small enough to do something about it? So yes, whether we want to change the wording on that, that's why we put other jurisdictions. That could be California, that could be back east, could be Australia for all that matters. We just felt that it wasn't proper to just have the BC Wildfire Service do an internal review again.
Director Houghton and then Director Sao.
Yeah, I'm in full support of what you're trying to do, Director Stamer. Somewhere in your wording, could you add there a severe loss of livestock and wildlife? One of my neighbors to the south informed me yesterday the Rossmore fire wiped out a considerable amount of their livestock and our precious wildlife. And that fire started back up at Lac Lejeune and to date is at the border of Guichon Ranch at the far end of Stump Lake. So I agree with your quickness and get this thing out because that thing's traveled many, many miles. So if that could be added, it'd be appreciated. Thank you.
Corporate Officer Jeremiah.
Thank you, Chair Roden. Just to clarify, you're requesting a review of the loss of wildlife and.
Well, you mentioned the loss of structures and loss of and other thing, but I'd like in there just recognize that was a severe loss of livestock and wildlife in the Rossmore Lake fire this year.
Okay, thank you.
And that to me is sickening.
And if I may, Chair Roden, we've forwarded this letter to all the other regional districts because we weren't entirely sure what we would do, you know, what this board would do with the letter. And staff has also sent the letter to UBCM with a request to send it to all the municipalities and all the regional districts in British Columbia. That was the whole point. It wasn't just to bring it to this board's attention, but it was to bring it to all our attention. And if somebody at UBCM wants to make an emergency resolution, that might be pertinent as well.
Thank you, Director Sao.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was wondering if, so it was mentioned that such a review audit was done after 2003 wildfire season. Could we have stat reports or audits? I don't know where I would find review it.
What, the Philman report? I believe it's online and there's the Abbott Chapman report. So it's the Philman, FILMON report was done after the 2003 wildfire season. And then after the 2017 wildfire season, there was the Abbott Chapman, ABBOTT Chapman report that came out after that, but there was no formal report after the 2021 wildfire season. Director Hamer Jackson.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if, you know, I've heard of, you know, residents, being in areas they shouldn't have been, but I'm wondering if to be proactive, if they could look at, you know, training for people and things like that in areas prior to, because there was a lot of people that put a lot of spot fires out. And I think that if you know, they be proactive about it. I mean, I even talked to some aerial firefighters that, you know, the people on the ground, they were complaining because there's no aerial support, but the aerial pilots can't bomb when they don't know who's there because they can kill somebody. So I'm just thinking in these specific areas, where they could go in and train, I don't care if it's wherever it is, you know, be proactive and have that ready to go, you know, where they've got communication and everything else. Because like I said, the aerial guys couldn't even go in there because they didn't know who was where. And I think that they almost did hit somebody this year. So just a suggestion.
And Director Stamer, correct me if I'm wrong, because you're probably more familiar with the Philman and Abbott Chapman reports than I am. I mean, one of the things I've heard is why do they need another third-party review? They've already done these two and they have not implemented many of the recommendations. But I think what we've seen this year, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, is more people staying behind to protect their own properties, which was not so much of a factor in previous fire seasons, which is a huge thing, which the BC Wildfire Service and the province are going to have to confront and deal with.
Well,
So-
well, thank you, Madam Chair. That's the exact purpose of this. And then if you remember our conversation with the Solicitor General a few months back, I actually brought that question up to him about how are we able to, you know, confidently support an alert and an order if we aren't confident ourselves, if you remember that conversation. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do is, as a group, we're trying to rebuild the trust of the public so that when we are in a situation, whether you're in Juniper or you're in Vernon or you're in somewhere else, and we recommend that you leave, unless you've got the necessary training and you are signed up or you have the experience, your safety is paramount and you do have to leave. But unfortunately, I believe that a lot of the public is losing faith and losing trust in some of those reactions to fires. And that is the direct result of why we saw so many people stay behind. So I agree. That's one of the reasons. I'm not looking to point fingers here. I'm looking to try to get to the bottom of some of this so we can fix it, because we just keep having the same conversation over and over and over. It's getting worse and worse and worse, and we've got to do something about it. And there are examples where we've been successful. There's examples where we haven't been successful. Why not? So that is what I'm trying to get at. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's any members of the legislature that have any fire line experience. And I talked to one of our local MLAs about that. And he said, yes, unfortunately, I don't. Well, we need people that have that experience. I have that experience. Unfortunately, I've been in a lot of fires and I've done everything from heavy equipment, layout, falling danger trees still on fire because they're spreading flames all over the place. I've done all of it. And we need more people like that from on the ground to be able to participate and not just have these experts supposedly tell us that this is what we want to keep doing in the future, because I don't think we're going to have much forest left if we keep doing it. A friend of mine who's a registered professional forester basically said, if we keep doing what we're doing, we'll burn 85% of our forests in 20 years. So unless if that's what we want to do, then that's what we're going to have to do. And we can talk about fire mitigation. We can talk about fuel reduction. That's not what this meeting was about. That's where we will get through the review. We'll talk about landscape management issues. We'll have all these kinds of things hopefully flushed out. So in the spring, people have a greater sense of confidence going not only in the ability of the wildfire service to be able to attack these fires and put them out if we can, but also that if we ask you to be on alert or specifically be ready to leave and you leave, you will leave and not have to worry about people left behind. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Director Hayward, and then Director Sal.
I just want to reiterate what Ward is saying, but put it really basic. If we don't do something, we're going to see a lot of people die. And if we don't do something, as Ward says, we're going to see a lot of trees die. And I've personally been watching it since 2003. And it's consistent. We had a little area where it was pretty good, and now we're falling right back to the same old story where nobody trusts BC Wildfire. And if they don't trust BC Wildfire, they're going to stay on their homes. And that is a big problem. So I really encourage us to support the letter. It's important.
Director Sal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to share something that after talking with Director Thorpe during the Blue River trip, realized it wasn't shared. The outreach from BC Wildfire through Fraser Basin Council was not done to every regional district. It was myself, Area A, and I believe 2 other areas. But anyway, so just sharing that BC Wildfire is contracted Fraser Basin Council to ask rural areas without structural fire protection, basically without a fire department, if there are interest to take training from BC Wildfire officially and receive equipment. And I thought that was almost like a rhetorical question. Of course there is. So I consulted with my Wells Grey Country Services Committee members for our 5 communities, and everybody said, I'm sorry, the 3 areas without protection zone, Birch Island, Upper Clearwater, and East Blackpool, and all 3 communities said yes. So I went back to Fraser Basin Council. I shared that information with Director Thorpe. I realized I should share that with the whole board to feel free to reach out to Fraser Basin Council to tell them that actually also your community has interest as well. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Director Sao. Any other questions or comments? On the question then, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. And we have a third item of action correspondence. Lynn Bryson and Bernie Fink from Knutsford requesting support regarding lack of cellular access in rural communities in BC.
Is this the first letter that we've received like this?
Well, I have a recommendation that we write to Emergency Management and Climate Readiness Minister and relevant ministries regarding cell phone coverage as a public safety measure. And further, that the TNRD write to cellular providers to make them aware of gaps in the coverage in this region and its importance as a safety matter. So Director Houghton, are you comfortable with that? You made, all right, thank you. And Director Morris, thank you. Questions or comments? Director Houghton.
Where this stems from is the recent Rossmore fire and the communication where these people live, which is right down by Stump Lake Ranch, partway down 5A. And right basically from Knutsford Hall right through to till you get past Stump Lake, probably the Douglas Lake turnoff. It's very poor cell service. And the bulk of the fire was on the upper side of the highway. And when their people are trying to communicate amongst themselves, and we have a Knutsford Fire Watch, is trying to communicate with the residents. It was very tough with the cell service that we have up there. And I know Lynn's just wants some support to try and make them aware, all the providers, that we would like some assistance on 5A. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Director Stamer, Director Sao, and Director Morris.
Thanks. Thank you, Madam Chair. It seems to me it wasn't very long ago that there was letters of support from the TNRD to our cell providers for additional grants that were available that they were looking for improvements. And it seems like we keep having this conversation every 6 months to a year. I'm wondering if we can get staff to ask all the cellular providers in the Thompson-Nicola Regional District for an update on the improvements that they have so far promised us and what's going on with those.
A.O. Hildebrand.
Thank you, Chair Roden, to Director Stamer. That's certainly, we can follow up that, the letter, as well as following up with our contacts, because they've been quite open with us with these types of requests. So we'll certainly do that.
Director Sao.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just sharing with the board another personal experience in relation to a cell service. Wells Grey Park in Area A, it's a big area, lots of tourists, lots of potential for emergency evacuations of thousands of tourists. I had the opportunity to meet with Minister Heyman on Monday. He's the Minister of Environment, Climate Change Strategy, who oversees BC Parks. I told him one of the problem was there was no place to put cell towers. That was the feedback I got from a lady who was with Rogers. I met at Silga on the bus. And so I look forward to bringing that news back to her that BC Parks. So Minister Heyman said no follow-up with the area manager. And I had a phone call with him yesterday morning, and he said, actually, he claims that nobody was requested. I knew you'd like that, Merlin. To put cell towers, and I suggested, Green Mountain Lookout, and he said, oh, okay, we can. It's relatively straightforward with a park use permits. So I look for that's, if you have provincial parks in your area, that's perhaps one of the roadblocks and how you get around that, talk to the area manager for a park use permits to put up a cell tower. Yeah.
Thank you. I have Director Morris.
Thank you. Yeah, just quickly to add, my thinking has been that we need to update what I call a gap analysis, because even if you look at Area P, if there's lots of gap areas where there isn't service. So if we can identify that and turn that into an advocacy piece across the TNRD, that would be useful, for sure. Pinatan is a great little example. You know, really, there's no cell service in parts of Pinatan, and that's got to be happening all over, sort of mid-country, backcountry, British Columbia, I would suspect, that kind of example. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have Director Sarai.
Director Steamer asked my question. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? Director Blackwell.
Yeah, I mean, I've been fighting this battle since 2011 or 12. It was one of the first assignments that John Harwood as mayor gave me, was to do gap analysis, including going to the point of asking citizens to submit take a speed test, submit a snapshot of that, and then I compiled that, sent that off to TELUS and other providers, MassCon, in our area. Ironically, 4 years later, they told me about this great thing that Clinton was doing, which is exactly what I had done, and they thought it was the best new idea they'd seen, because they'd already forgotten that I'd already been doing it for 2 of the last 4 years. The experience on this, and this is why I asked for this, I would ask for the support of the whole board on this, and that you take this back to your individual organizations, your councils, your boards, is that I think this needs a real pile on. It's beginning to feel like Lucy taking the football out from Charlie Brown, if it's Lucy. Anyways, you think you've won, and you've convinced somebody at upper level management and TELUS that they need to do this because it's the right thing to do, that there is actually, in the case of Wells Gray Park, there is a business case with 425,000 tourists, half of them foreign, all of them wanting to send a video of that bear that they just took to their friends in Europe, and the data charges would be insane. And you think you won, and you see the dollar signs in their eyes, and then 6 months later, it's just all gone, and you're back to square one, and it's like they've completely forgotten you've had the conversation. So I implore you all to pile on this one, and let's get it done.
Thank you. Any further, basically, if it's got BC in front of its name, then this seems to be a motif. Any further questions or comments? On the question, then all those in favor, opposed if any, that's carried. We have some items for information only, like items 11.21, 2, and 3. Does anyone have any questions or comments regarding any of these? Director Laird?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Pat Lamb from Harmon Lake Estates is in my area. And I do have some questions after reading through the report that she has asked. One of the ones, something I would like to know is when the last fire protection established bylaw was reviewed. Has there been a recent review of that bylaw? Is there an established bylaw for reserve funds that are now being generated from Area M&N? And this year in the 2023 budget, there was $2,000 allocated to reserve, but I don't know if there's a established bylaw to hold reserve funds for Area M&N in the fire protection area. The other thing that has come up is, and it's the fact that fire protection is now on land and improvements. And what's happened over the years, if you think back at one time, you buy a $5,000 lot and then built a $50,000 or $60,000 house on it. So the land had very little implication in the overall tax. Now, when you look, especially in Harmon Lake Estates, their properties has gone from maybe $50,000 or $60,000 in the around 2000, and now they're anywhere from $500,000 or more just for the land. And then they're improvements now. The houses, a lot of the houses there were built in the 60s. So the land has gone up substantially, but the value of the house was only a $50,000 value to start with. So then now you look at now with the assessments, the land is quite a substantial part of the assessment, and their houses almost have gone up quite substantially as well because of the location and type of property it is. So I was wondering if the inclusion in land for fire protection area is appropriate, should not just be on improvements. That was another question I had. And the other thing is, when you have land, most fire departments are structure only. You have to have a trained fire department to get into interface fire. I'm not sure whether our Merritt Fire Department would actually get involved in interface fire. One of the properties has a title, and it's all trees. And it's so if we have a fire and it's in our fire protection area, and we're paying in our assessment to have a fire truck to show up and put out a fire on the bare land that is forested, and they don't show up. I don't know if the Merritt Fire Department would respond to that sort of fire. So that's what I was wondering about, why my land would be included in the assessed value. And I had one other question. In a line item, there was $979 drawn coming from a community improvement fund. I don't know how it got into our fire protection budget, but that particular fund has to be either approved by the director or asked the board to support that funding going into a fire protection area. And I have no knowledge of that happening. So those are the questions that I had. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe the General Manager of Operations has something wants to speak to this. Mr. Vieira?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and to Director Laird. Forgive me, I think I got all your questions. I'll work through them. So the question about the reserve funds and has that capital reserve been established? This is the first year we've budgeted any reserve funds, and it's not a capital reserve. The intent is to create an operational reserve. Now, CFO Fox is in here. I can't confirm if that's officially been done yet or not, but this year would be the first year. So we'll have a balance of the $2,000 that was budgeted for this year. And the intent of the operating reserve is to have funding available to assist with balancing issues like what we had in this situation where we had to run a deficit because there was no operational reserve to draw on. The question about the bylaw review, I'm not sure, correct me if I didn't understand it, if I didn't understand your question correctly, but the last time the bylaw for area M&N was updated was the service establishment that did include the community apartment estates, which was in 2018. So that was the most recent amendment of this bylaw. There's, I believe, 5 amendments that have happened to this bylaw since the service was first created. Was that the question?
Can I just, from Pat Lamb's research, the original bylaw was done in 1996. And what we've done is we've amended the original bylaw. So have we reviewed the 1996 bylaw, establishment bylaw to collect funds? Is it up to date? Is it, because that's a long time ago, and when you reflect back on how the assessed values have changed and how land is such a big part of our assessment, is it still fair that we include land and improvements, tax for a fire protection area? Now, this fire protection area, this is, it's not all fire protection areas. What we're looking at is a contracted services. And we have a contract service with the City of Merritt to supply fire protection. I understand if you want to go into like a full fire department, I think they have 9 fire departments now, then it might be appropriate to include land and improvements. But when you're just providing, there's no capital expenses. It's strictly a contract with the City of Merritt to supply a fire truck outside your door. So I was wondering if we couldn't look at that and see if the bylaw would reflect any of that.
So through the chair to Director Laird, so the question about reviewing the bylaw, we have not reviewed whether or not the amount being charged that's set in the bylaw needs to be adjusted, where we're still currently charging far below the maximum amount set in the bylaw. So the specific answer to your question is no, we haven't assessed that. Typically, when service establishment bylaws go in place, they're set and only reviewed if directed by the board. But that said, there's been 4 amendments to the bylaw that have reflected changes and expansion of that service area. And I can address the question about land and improvements or make a comment on it just for clarity for the board. All of our service establishment bylaws for fire protection, or almost all of them, were set up as land and improvements that are taxable on. A bit of a background, the scenario in this situation was that the bylaw had always been set up to charge based on land and improvements. However, when it was entered on the provincial side into their system for taxation purposes from the property taxation branch, there was an error made that wasn't noticed until last year, that it wasn't being assessed charged properly. So the correct total amount of taxation was being collected, but when this was corrected to reflect the bylaw, it changed the way it was distributed in terms of how much each property owner would pay. So for example, a property that had someone who owned property that had no improvements on it was paying nothing towards fire protection, whereas all of our fire protection areas where we charge on land improvements, the idea is that there's an inherent value to your land of having fire protection, regardless of whether there's a structure there or not to protect. We do the same thing in our utility system. There's a utility parcel tax if you're within the utility system, even if you're not connected to that. And the idea being there's an inherent value of being in a utility system with the opportunity to connect if you so choose. The question about the interface fire with the city of Merritt. I guess two answers to that question. I don't know exactly how Merritt would respond to an interface fire within that fire protection area, but I can clarify, like, I don't know operationally how they would respond. Our contract with the city of Merritt for this fire protection area, as well as other municipalities we contract with, is for external structural protection. So external protection for structural. Generally speaking, it's BC Wildfire that would respond to other fires, so that it's not contemplated in the contract with Merritt how they would deal with an interface fire. Did I cover all the questions, Director Laird? Yes, and that was addressed, thank you for that, through the chair to Director Laird. That was addressed in my response to Ms. Lamb, that it was actually a naming error in the budget, and that was corrected, that it was I can't remember it was renamed, but the expenditure was not out of the community benefit fund. The expenditure was out of the area M&N budget, which was the tax refund that was issued when we had to amend the boundaries last year and remove properties from the fire protection area. So that error has been corrected.
Director Ranta.
Thank you, Chair. I read with interest the letter from Pat Lamb and found it to be somewhat accusatory, and was a little bit disappointed in that, because I have confidence in the staff of the regional district appropriately charging taxes as they should be, and I'm glad to see this correction having taken place. But occasionally, I don't know if I was just falling asleep or what, but reading through Pat Lamb's letter, I found my eyes rolling up in my head occasionally. And then I got to the response from Mr. Vieira, and quite honestly, I was absolutely thrilled with the tone of your response. I thought it was very comprehensive. And I'd like to personally commend you for having taken the time to respond in that manner.
And thank you, Director Ranta. I see Director Grenier, you've got your hand up, but before that, Director Grenier and Director Getz. But Mr. Vieira, perhaps you just like to explain to the rest of the board what is going on behind the scenes regarding the Harmon Estates, because staff are working on this to provide answers that arose from questions at a meeting with some of the residents.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So yes, it's not the end of the story. This correspondence occurred. There was a follow-up meeting with the resident representatives from the area. And another list of questions came that we're working on a response that'll actually be sent out tomorrow. And I will say that this response had a lot of help from other folks, definitely CFO Fox and Ms. Jeremiah helped in the creation of this, put together this information.
All right, I have Directors Grenier, Getz, and Laird. Director Grenier.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Vieira. I'm just wondering, when I read the letter, we got a bunch of people that seem to be unhappy with extension of fire protection service for whatever the reason is. And it's not a fire hall that they built, it's a contracted service. And if I got it right, there's a public assent process. I don't know when it started or where it's at, but is that public assent process, can that be revisited in the case of a contract? So if the folks are looking to have a second view of this and we come up with the numbers and what the rate is from the city of Merritt and so on and so forth and say, okay, here's where you're at. You either want this extension of service or you don't. Is that something that we can put on the table for these folks to finally get a yes or no on this issue?
Yeah, thank you for that question through the chair. I think it's important to understand that part of the reason of this, we understand the sort of frustration and there's some confusion here, because what happened was that when this public assent happened, it was not exclusively for this group of properties, but the property owners in that area were under the misunderstanding that it was. So this group of properties joined a larger existing fire protection area. So to answer your question, there would be a mechanism that that we could go through to remove properties from an existing service establishment area, but then that would also have an impact on the existing service area as well. So there's not a standalone contract for this group of properties with the city of Merritt. The TNRD has for background for the whole board, the TNRD has a contract with the city of Merritt to provide fire protection to over 1,000 properties on all sides of Merritt that are all included in this one service area.
So just to be clear, there's a section of TNRD residents that seem to be unhappy with the arrangement. And they were included in the original ask. There is a group that want fire protection. This group may or may not, based on its perceived imbalance, that they perceive an imbalance or they're not happy with the procedure. So at the end of the day, if they're not happy with answers that you provide in the first letter or the second letter or whatever, would it be appropriate to go back and say, if you don't want fire protection, we have a mechanism here that you could invoke or ask us to invoke, or otherwise, this is the way it is. And wouldn't that sort of resolve it to everybody's satisfaction? They'd have a vote.
And yes, that will be, it is an option that will be presented to them, or has been, that they understand that they can be removed from the service. But I think right now the discussion and the communication and where we're trying to educate them is that that the taxation that was put on their properties was correct and adhering to the bylaw, whereas the suggestion is that we made an error and an error had not been made. They're just not happy with the cost.
Thank you, Director Getz.
Thank you. Just a couple things. One of the comments here from Pat Lamb's letters, she says, I understand there were issues with the Lower Nicola Indian Band not wanting to protect Lower Nicola and the Sunshine Valley. That's completely incorrect. Fire underwriters insurance decides when a fire hall, the Lower Nicola Fire Hall, is not able to muster a proper crew. So it's not that they don't want to protect these properties, they're not able to. So we have an agreement with them, and I do believe we have a small agreement with Logan Lake to assist as well. Now, when this first came out, we had done an internal review and realized that these people were getting their fire protection at 12 cents per 1,000 assessed value, which was way under and had been for many years. So we moved it to 64 cents. Got a lot of complaints, got a lot of phone calls from these people saying, well, we don't see a single fire engine out here. And I said, well, have you had a fire? No. Well, we just don't drive around in the fire engine all day long so you can see the red engine come by your house. It just doesn't work that way. Now, the other thing is if you choose to opt out, good luck getting house insurance because you won't get any. So this is standard operating procedure. If the board and the group requests that, I can have our fire chief draw up a very document on why everything was done here. We do have a wildland fire engine that we purchased. We sent some of our firefighters over to Kelowna to do such structural and interface fire. We are capable of doing it. But if the board so wishes, I can get a detailed explanation of why everything has happened here with the Merritt Fire Department, what we cover and what we don't. And that might go a long way to semi-soothe Pat. I'm just glad she's chewing on somebody else now. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And Director Laird. Okay, noted, thank you. And did you have a comment you wanted to make, Director Laird?
Thank you, Madam Chair. What's happened there, it's a 21 lot subdivision. Their fire protection taxes went from up, some of them had a 300% increase. They went from about $300 a year. One person is paying $1,700 in this particular instance. And they don't get any break on their insurance because they're outside the time travel and the mileage. All they will get is a fire truck will show up when there's a fire. And chances are it won't get there quick enough to put the fire out in the house, but it'll get there quick enough to put the fire out so it doesn't travel through the neighborhood. And that's what they're looking at. And now the 21 properties are paying approximately 7% of the total cost of the fire protection area. And it's not, something's not right. And that's what they're discussing. And it's a very, you might make fun and say that Pat's a very tenacious person. And I know her, I've dealt with her before, and she is. And she's a retired accountant, and she did forensic audits. So she's very aware how the system works. And these are questions that I think are legitimate, and they need to be answered properly. Because when you look and see how much money those 21 properties are paying compared to the whole of the fire district, it doesn't make any sense. And that's why I'm asking the questions about possibly changing from land and improvements and just including improvements. It makes more sense as far as taxations goes. So if you have $1 million house, you pay more than the guy that has a $500,000 house for your fire protection. And that's what we're looking at. But they don't get fire protection. They get a guarantee of a truck showing up with 1,000 gallons of water in it, and that's it. Then hopefully they can control the fire. So that's the type of service that they're paying for. Anyway, sorry about my ramble, but I do get a little excited when they start making fun of somebody who's taken the time to look into and ask questions about why we're paying this much in taxes.
No, and a point well taken, Director Laird, about residents, and we are here to answer their questions, and Ms. Lamb has a number of questions. I believe staff are doing their very best to answer those questions. Unfortunately, we are in a situation where answers to questions are begetting more questions. So hopefully at the end of it, we will be able to come to a more equitable agreement or something that satisfies at least the residents of Harmon Estates. So thank you for being an advocate for them. Thank you to staff for taking their questions seriously and finding answers. And I believe Director Stamer has a comment.
No, just a question. Thank you, Madam Chair, to Director Laird. Director Laird, how big of an physical area are we talking about with those 21 properties?
It's a small subdivision that was been there since 1960. It used to be an area where residents in Merritt would be able to buy a house out on the lake, or they could buy a lot and build a house on the lake. And the houses that are out there are very small, because then a cottage on the lake was a cottage on the lake. Other than when you look and see what's happening at Nicola Estates, the cottage on the lake there is $2 million. $1 million they're building for a cottage on the lake, where these are true cottages. And it's not the way that the assessments are working. It doesn't fit into and it's 21 lots. And that's what the discussion's around.
Thank you for that. And I agree with you. And the second question I have is, what kind of response time do they actually have? Even if that's the limited resources that show up, what is their response time?
It's about 20 minutes, 25 minutes. So they're well outside the protection area, and they don't get any breaks on their insurance at all. They're paying so that the truck shows up when there's a fire, whether it's in a shed or a neighbor's shed. They're paying so that their neighbors won't burn down. And that's the service that's being provided. There's two levels of service within a fire protection area. There's the one that fit into the magic, timelines. And then there's the ones that are outside of it. And quite a bit of our area is outside. So they don't get the full fire protection. Lower Nicola's got hydrants and all that sort of thing. So they get a break on their insurance. Whereas other areas, you're lucky if the insurance, you can get insurance. Even with the fire protection that we have now, there's a lot of insurance companies that won't insure houses. And they're basically paying to protect their neighborhood.
And is there opportunities for additional water capacity? If there's only 1,000 gallons, is there opportunities that we can offer through the TNRD with storage for them, or do they already have that?
They have Nicola Lake right outside, but the truck has to be able to draft out of the lake. There's no way of connecting to the water, and depending on the level of the lake, it's difficult to draft out of. So that's all they have is what shows up in the truck.
All right, I have Directors Getz, Middleton, Beppel, and Sow, and then I think that after that, if no one has anything material to add, we will move on. So Director Getz.
Yes, I do want to apologize for my comment. Director Laird is correct. It was uncalled for me to make that comment. So I offer my apologies to Director Laird and Pat. It was uncalled for, so I'm sorry for that.
Thank you, Director Getz. Director Middleton.
Thank you. I'm not that familiar with the area, but if we're just looking at how taxes and whatnot are set are basically through the assessed values of the properties, correct? That some of the increases that they have seen in their costs of fire protection are directly related to the cost of or the increases in the values of their properties, so that math just sort of goes up exponentially, particularly on recreational, even if it's somebody's full-time home, if it's in an area that's could typically be recreational. We know what that market has done in the last 10 years. So to me, would their issue, or perhaps their complaint, or their avenue of recourse would be back through the assessment authority to say, hey, we haven't got, adequate fire protection here. You valued our properties like we've got a fire department sitting on our doorstep and whatnot, that maybe it's the assessed values of the properties that needs to be examined rather than, the cost of the fire protection itself. I don't know, it's sort of a long document with a lot of moving parts in it to actually come down, but I would say this appears, or their avenue to complain, other than a few things were perhaps listed a bit, sort of in error or whatever, but end of the day, the assessed values of their properties is what's really driving the tax increases. Just my thought.
Thank you. Alternate Director Bethel?
Thanks. Just a comment and then a suggestion. I wouldn't say that you're paying for the fire department to come out to put out your fire so that your neighbor's house doesn't burn down. You're paying for the fire department to come out to put out your neighbor's house fire, so your house doesn't burn down. So, I mean, there is a value, whichever way you look at it. But I'd suggest, and I think Director Laird spoke to this, is that the bylaw could be reviewed, and I would just suggest that if it was something that Director Laird or someone else thought was important, that they put forward a notice of motion to have it reviewed. I personally think that, we fundamentally tax on land and improvements, and I don't think it would be good to go away from that, but if there's an appetite to, then that could be looked at, but I don't think we're going to get anywhere unless the bylaw is reviewed in some way.
Thank you. And Director Sal?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a comment and a suggestion as well. Comment that, I appreciate topics like this being brought up, and that's what I appreciate being on board, sharing experiences across a regional districts, because similarly in Area A, we are looking at expanding Vavenby Fire Department's coverage to Birch Island as well. And that kind of topic brought into my mind, hopefully that will be on my radar to ensure that we don't have, now you're covered fire protection, but you don't get any benefit, but you're paying more. So I thank you, this experience. And to share a potential solution, I don't know, so for Vavenby right now, they're looking at putting up as part of this potential proposal, to put up a satellite hall, like a shelter for a water tender in Birch Island, so that it reduces that response time to within whatever minutes required for lower insurance. And also putting up from Blackpool Fire Department, they've really taken initiative to put stage 6,000 gallon water storage tanks around the area. So that perhaps, I'm not sure if you could, maybe Director Laird, you can work with staff on that to see if that can potentially resolve that for the subdivision.
All right, thank you, everyone. And just to reiterate, staff is working on answering the most recent questions from the residents of Harmon Estates. So I suspect that this will be coming back before us with more information. We move on to item 12, new business. Is there any new business? Director Houghton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to make the board aware, in part of our electoral area L, since about August 15th, we've had a serious, I don't want to call it a water war, but that's what it's turning into, a water dispute between the residents of the Salmon River watershed and the Ministry of Forests. And Salmon River watershed, basically part of it starts up at Salmon Lake at Douglas Lake Ranch, comes down as it did this spring, roaring and flooding through the community of Westwold. And then later on in the year, it actually goes underground, and the lake bed is dry until you get into Falkland and then down the Salmon Valley towards Salmon Arm. And Ministry of Forests, who seem like they're in the control of the water department, I always thought it was lands, water and resources, but maybe they had a cabinet shuffle or something. But Ministry of Forests are the ones that, they voluntarily asked the residents in the Westwold area to cut back on their water consumption for irrigation purposes to 50% and then down to 30%. Not everybody got a letter. And then on or about the 15th of August, I don't think there was horrible communication between the government and the residents. And instead of consulting. They send out the NROs with guns at side and their fancy Ford pickups and go hand to hand and hand out these little notices that we're ceasing, going to shut off your water. Some residents they went to, some they didn't. It was kind of a hit and miss deal. And so, of course, the blood starts to boil. And in the agricultural world, water is a very valuable resource as it is to everybody. And I think it's getting more valuable as time goes on. So the residents of Westwell created a video. I imagine a lot of you have seen it. That pretty well tells you the true story of what happened. And, you know, the residents were very cordial, I think, up until maybe lately with the NRO staff. And all they asked for is for consultation from the ministry that made this decision to tell us the total science and the reason behind this and why you want to shut our taps off and force us during an irrigation system. We feel there is adequate water underneath because it's all comes from wells now. They're not pumping out of the Salmon River. And they all have meters or they all have levels on their wells and where their actual wells are. And they keep data over the course of time. So last Saturday, I attended along with Director Morris a Westwold community meeting at the Westwold Community Hall, and was put on by the BC United Party. Leader Kevin Falcon, local reps Miller, Stone, and 5 other MLAs from around the interior hosted it, and was for an informational session to hear from the public on their views and maybe some ways of dealing with this in a proper manner. And twice I made just a personal phone call, started with an email, but I never got any response to Minister Ma's chief of staff. One was before this meeting and one was actually Saturday afternoon after the meeting. And I said, ma'am, I highly suggest before this thing gets ugly, that somebody from the ministry responsible sit down with maybe not all 600 residents, pick 6. And I said, I'm willing to put this meeting on, but this thing could get ugly. I said, I've seen people shot before over water. I've seen fist fights. I've seen lots of different things in my day over water. And as time went on, this last week, since that meeting, NROs have been out again. Some people complied. Some people wanted to keep water, and that's their decision, just like an EVAC order, I guess. And yesterday, the NROs, with the assistance of their RCMP, attended one of our constituency farms and served a warrant to this couple. And they called them a pump specialist from Vancouver to cut the lock off their pump house and go and turn off their water and then go, we're going to turn it back on. And the resident said, you turn that back on, you don't know what the heck you're doing. You're going to blow my whole pivot up. And it's about a $350,000 deal. So anyhow, they basically left them alone, but nothing's being resolved. And what I would ask the board and the staff to do is I don't know if a letter is correct, or reach out to Ministry of Forests and Minister Ralston, the people responsible, to have those people consult with the selected group of the Salmon River watershed to not only deal with what we're going to do right now, but what's the long-term solution, and talk and communicate with them. Because, you know, there was no fisticuffs yesterday. These people, you know, probably maybe the use of language probably got heated, I would think. And, but nothing's been resolved, and somebody's going to get hurt. And I think in this modern day and age of communication, it's up to the government of the day to communicate with these people properly. And that has not been done. And I asked, reason for bringing this up is to ask the staff and maybe Corbin to talk to the folks responsible. Let's see if we can turn the temperature down on this and have some consultation with the people. I think that's in the year 2023. I don't think we're asking for too much. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Houghton. So would it be appropriate for Mr. Kelly to reach out to the appropriate ministries to discuss the situation. Do we need a resolution regarding that?
No, I think we could just provide direction to staff to do it. I don't think we needed a motion to do so.
We do not need a formal motion.
No.
Okay, thank you. I
Thank
have
you.
Director Hamer Jackson and then Director Grenier.
Yeah, I'd just like to say what you're talking about. We have a lot of farmers in our area that are very stressed about water. But I'd really like everyone, I don't know if you guys watched the video, but it's on YouTube. And it's Farms Under Attack. Stolen water, waging war on water rights and BC food security. It's actually quite a good video if if anybody wants to have a look at it.
Thank you, Director Hamer Jackson. Director Grenier.
Thank you, Chair. This is an update on the Tranquil Chris Creek Road repairs. You might recall that the board wrote a letter to the Minister of Transportation. They committed to do some works on that road. And I've been in regular contact with our local representative from ministry. And they have begun the repair work, but in the course of this, they've identified a section of the road that they attribute to the city of Kamloops. So this, I guess, is going out to the city of Kamloops councillors that I'm wondering if we could have some kind of a meeting about the section that the ministry says is city of Kamloops responsibility. I did go to our planning department. Mr. Kraus confirmed that the area that they've identified in a map that they provided me, which is essentially, if you're familiar with the road, there's a cattle guard there, and it's just south of the cattle guard, but from the cattle guard to the unfinished paved section, so it goes across the bridge. And ironically, that is one of the worst sections of the road, and it's bad because it's washboard city, and so they're working on their section about the washboard, and they've got a program, but it kind of leaves a gaping hole. And I'm sure now that I brought it to your attention, I'm sure that we can have a chance to look at it, but we'd sure love to get that part of the problem solved, because it was one of the big items. So that's just an update, and I'd be happy to take it up with city council in some fashion that suits and time.
Thank you, Director Grenier. Alternate Director Beppel.
Thanks so much. Since I was here last, I have been appointed to some committees for the FCM, the Rural Forum, the Standing Committee on Anti-Racism and Equity, and the Standing Committee on Municipal Finance, Infrastructure and Transportation. So in terms of the municipal finance, infrastructure and transportation, one thing is that their FCM as a whole, I would say it's their current #1 goal is to find different sources of revenue for local government, as opposed to simply property taxes and fees for service. Because all sorts of local governments are finding it difficult to collect and service their citizens just with property taxes. Infrastructure includes what we talked about earlier in terms of cellular connections. So, and then transportations. And then in terms of the Rural Forum, some of the, just going to bring it up. Oh, shoot. Some of the things that they're looking at for the Rural Forum is the housing. So there's a concern that housing issues are not just for cities, that there's stress on housing and homelessness in the rural areas. that there's an equitable funding strategy for infrastructure within rural areas, intercommunity transportation such as buses or transit, and then the RCMP retroactive costs and future contract policing. So I'm happy to bring back reports as I have my committee meetings, but also if there's areas of concern that you have that you would want to be brought to the FCM, I'm happy to take those to those committee meetings. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Alternate Director Beppel. Are there any other items of new business? Seeing none, we move on to question period. Do we have any questions from members of the public? No. All right, we do have need of a closed meeting, so we will take a 5-minute break and then reconvene.